The Goblins of the Sierra. This story was told to me by Professor Miguel, a man who spent part of his life teaching in rural schools. He remembers in detail one of his first assignments, a job he was given in the mountains of Oaxaca. This experience marked him in a different way, and he certainly never forgot it. He was an idealistic young man when he was sent to a small school in a remote community, not knowing that there, among the mountains and forests, he would face something that neither books nor his training could prepare him to handle. The school was located on the edge of the village, a humble building with tin roofs and adobe walls. The children were kind and curious, and the parents, though reserved, were grateful that someone had come to teach their children. Professor Miguel settled into a small cabin near the school, excited to begin his teaching career. However, it wasn't long before problems began. The first few weeks passed quietly, but one night, while correcting some assignments in his cabin, he heard strange noises. They sounded like small footsteps, as if someone were running around the house. He looked out the window but saw no one. He thought it might be some animal from the forest and didn't think much of it. The next day, some objects in the cabin were out of place. The things he had left on the table were scattered on the floor. The books had fallen off the shelves. He attributed it to the wind, although he knew the windows had been closed. He tried not to worry and returned to his daily routine. The noises and the objects being out of place continued. Every night, he heard those small footsteps and sometimes soft laughter, as if a group of children were playing outside in the dark. Objects would disappear and reappear in strange places, as if someone were playing tricks on him. Miguel began to feel nervous, sleeping poorly and sensing an unsettling presence in the cabin. One day he decided to talk to the villagers about what was happening. He wasn't sure how to bring it up, but during a conversation with one of the children's mothers, he felt encouraged to mention what had been happening. "I've been hearing strange things in the cabin," he said, trying to sound casual. "Noises and, well, things that disappear and appear in different places." The woman looked at him with an expression he didn't quite understand at first. Then she sighed and made the sign of the cross. "It's the goblins, teacher," she said quietly. "They like to play with outsiders." Miguel furrowed his brow. He didn't believe in goblins or anything supernatural, but the seriousness in the woman's eyes sent a chill down his spine. "Goblins?" he repeated, trying not to sound incredulous. "Yes, teacher. The goblins of the Sierra are mischievous, and sometimes if they don't like someone they can be very annoying. Maybe they're testing your patience." That night the noises grew louder. The footsteps around the cabin became more pronounced, as if something were banging on the walls. Miguel sat in bed, tense, listening to the strange sounds. He gathered his courage and went outside with a lantern, but when he shone it around the cabin, he saw absolutely nothing. It was just him in the darkness, surrounded by the dense forest. He went back inside, convinced that someone was playing a prank on him, maybe the children from the village. But just as he sat back on the bed, he felt a tap on his leg. It wasn't a hard tap, but it was clear enough to make him shout in surprise. He jumped up, shining the lantern around him. There was no one. The tap was followed by another, this time on his arm and then another on his back. It wasn't painful, but it was terrifying, like invisible hands were pushing and pinching him. He ran out of the cabin, shouting and waving the lantern in every direction. He spent the night at the school, not knowing what to do or who to turn to. The next morning, exhausted and scared, he went to see an elderly man from the village. Don Juan was known for his knowledge of such things. He told him what had been happening, hoping the old man would laugh at him, but Don Juan listened attentively, nodding slowly. "Yes, teacher, the goblins are mischievous. But sometimes they are guardians of the land. They don't like it when someone new arrives and doesn't show respect. I think they're testing you, young man." Miguel didn't know how to respond. How could he show respect to something he didn't even believe in? "What should I do then?" he asked, feeling strange for asking advice about something so unreal. "You must make an offering. Bring something sweet like candy or fruit. Leave it in the forest and talk to them. Tell them you don't want to harm them, that you're just here to teach the children and that you respect their land." That night Miguel did as he was told. He brought a small basket with fruit and candy to the edge of the forest near the cabin. He felt foolish speaking to the air, but he was desperate. "I don't want trouble," he said out loud, feeling ridiculous. "I'm only here to teach. I respect you and ask that you leave me in peace, please." He left the basket and returned to the cabin, his heart racing. That night, as usual, he waited for the noises and the taps, but they didn't come. For the first time in weeks, the cabin was silent. Miguel stayed awake that evening, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually he fell asleep, and when he woke up the next morning, he felt as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The days and nights passed, the noises and taps never returned. The basket he had left in the forest disappeared, and Miguel decided not to ask or think too much about it. The villagers looked at him with a sort of respect after that, as if they had known what was happening and were pleased that he had resolved it in the right way. Miguel never spoke again about what happened in the Sierra. He didn't tell anyone outside the village, fearing they would think him a crazy superstitious person. But he certainly learned to respect what he didn't understand and accepted that in those forests and mountains, there are things that exist beyond his comprehension. And although he never saw or felt the presence of the goblins again, he knew they were there, watching him, guarding their land and protecting those who respected it. A story of witchcraft. I was never one of those people who believe in witchcraft or paranormal things. I grew up in the city with my head full of rational and modern ideas, but what I experienced that summer completely changed the way I see the world. I was 24 years old when I decided to visit my grandmother in her small village, a remote place surrounded by mountains and full of legends and superstitions. It wasn't the first time I had been, but it was the first in many years. I arrived just in time for one of the local festivals, a celebration that brought all the villagers together in the town square. There was music, dancing, food, and a festive atmosphere that made me forget for a moment the frantic pace of the city. My cousin Clara, who lived with my grandmother, joined me for the party. She introduced me to some people from the village whom I didn't know or didn't remember. Everything was going well until I had an encounter with a girl I hadn't seen before. It was something that came out of nowhere. We crossed paths near the food stalls and for no apparent reason she started pushing me and insulting me. She called me arrogant and an outsider. Surprised by her attitude, I told her to calm down. I didn't want to be rude, but her behavior was driving me crazy. The girl looked at me with hatred, her dark eyes full of resentment that made me shiver. Finally she walked away, giving me one last contemptuous look. My cousin, who had been a bit farther behind, quickly approached. "You shouldn't have responded to her," she said quietly,